Good afternoon, everybody who will be tuning into this. This is one of our first chat with a colleague in the Peace, Justice, Security thematic area here at PADF. I'm joined by my colleague Francis Burak. Francis is our Senior Justice Advisor in Jamaica, where he's working with the Jamaican courts, and he's been there for the last 3.5 years at PADF in this current role, working under the U.S. Department of State Bureau for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs project that we have funding there for. My name is Faisal Hassan. I'm Program Manager here at PADF HQ. I support our ongoing peace, justice, and security programming, as well as our wider Caribbean portfolio. And with that, I'd like to have Francis, introduce himself.
Right, okay, hi. Yeah, thanks, Faisal. Firstly, an apology that I appear to be having wires hanging out of my head. I think it's one of the problems with trying to do program work and using technology in the current circumstances. So yeah, thanks, Faisal. I joined PADF back end of 2017. Previous to that, I was with the UNODC Economic Crime and Anti-Corruption Branch, working mainly with judiciaries around the globe on integrity matters. And before that, I was in government with the UK, doing justice reform and institutional capacity building programming, also in the Caribbean, in Jamaica. My trade is an attorney at law. I'm a practicing barrister from England and Wales. And my early career was focused on prosecutions, court advocacy, in particular with a focus on serious and organized crime, and drugs and firearm trafficking, money laundering, financial crime, and asset recovery. So those were my sort of early specialisms before I went into the international work.
Yeah, and to go, I guess since we're going back a little bit, how did you decide on going towards a legal career? What was your, journey like, coming up in the UK? I believe you are a child of immigrants, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
How was that experience like in terms of getting interested in the law and everything like that?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they say sometimes these things run in the family. So I came from an expat family. So early years was in Zambia and Zimbabwe. And then schooling and latter years were in the UK, in the Midlands. As far as getting into law goes, perhaps it's coming from my mother's upbringing. Well, I was always going to be a doctor or a lawyer, whether I wanted it or not. Unfortunately, I didn't really have a flair for science. So I looked into law and gained an interest in law, realized how expensive it was. And I do remember telling my parents at one point that there's no way we could ever afford for me to firstly finish a law degree and also go to bar school, which at that time was, I don't know, about 15,000 US for not even a 1-year course. But we got through it one way or another. At that stage, it was a passion for defending and the principle that everybody should have a voice in court, no matter what they allegedly had done. And that's kind of what my drive was to get into law. And with a lot of support from my family, I was able to complete studies and vocational studies as well. So yes, first lawyer in the family. So first person to get into the law, which, like in a lot of other Western Hemisphere jurisdictions, is incredibly difficult to get into. But yes, the passion was defending, but I've never defended a case in my life. And this is one thing about law, Faisal. Sometimes people say that the practice finds you rather than exactly what you think you're going to do becoming the reality. So I actually, while I was looking for what they call pupillage, an apprenticeship, I started working for the sort of the equivalent of the DA's office, the Crown Prosecution Service in London in the UK. At that point, I actually worked in the post room in the Old Bailey, which is quite a well-known court, the Central Criminal Court. And it was really just to get some cash whilst I was trying to find the equivalent of an apprenticeship to become a barrister. And one thing led to another. So the post room led to admin led to casework led to junior prosecuting. And before I knew it, I was standing up in the Court of Appeal in the Royal Courts of Justice, dealing with some pretty high level cases. So it kind of reached that stage where I worked my way up through the ranks, and then the obvious choice was either management or to go into something like capacity building, where I can make use of the skills that I've built up over the years.
Yeah, and to go on that point in terms of capacity building, how long have you been in Jamaica, or how long have you been working in Jamaica? And why Jamaica? Why the Caribbean region? How did that come about, going from London to the Caribbean?
Yeah, on and off in Jamaica for what, 8.5 years maybe, with an interlude in Vienna for about a year or so. But I mean, at the time in 2012, I think it was, there were a variety of positions. It was all very new then for the UK government to second lawyers. Traditionally, it had been focused on law enforcement and international police officers. But I think around sort of 2010 through to 2011, 2012, there was a realization that you need to look at the entire criminal justice chain. And one can't just invest in the ability of police to conduct high-level investigations without looking at what the end game is going to be on the court side. So at that stage, there was a lot of positions coming up for secondments to what was then the UK equivalent of USA, the DFID, Department for International Development. And they wanted technical experts that actually had experience of doing these cases and making these decisions. And at that stage, it was asset recovery. I think it was financial crime, asset recovery, the justice sector, evidential reforms, that sort of thing. And I just applied. I was after something different, after a new challenge. And Jamaica, English common law jurisdiction, it's the Caribbean, the sun shines a lot. And I was in rainy Surbiton in Greater London. And I thought we might as well give it a go. Initially, it was planned to be a short-term secondment to help out on a program they had over here in Jamaica. But one thing leads to another. I developed a real enthusiasm for international work. As frustrating, as challenging as it can be, I realized that it can actually provide an awful lot of job satisfaction and quite a feeling of really making a big difference, not only to, for example, evidential frameworks or court procedures, but the effect that that has on regular people in communities in Kingston, Jamaica, and further afield. And I know it's something that's shared by my other colleagues doing similar work in the region. And it's one of those things that keeps us ticking, really.
Yeah, and regarding, talking about working within institutions or with institutions and how challenging that can be, because you're working with another government, it's not your government, you don't know everything that's going on, or everything that is needed at first.
Yeah.
What has that experience been like in terms of, the Jamaican context, right? You're working within an institution, you're trying to strengthen an institution or institutions. And a lot of our colleagues at PADF who are in a similar position to you, the ones who are in an advisory role or in an embedded role, it seems, there's no one particular challenge or one particular um, difficulty in terms of approaching these items. So what have you seen in Jamaica that's been the biggest challenge in terms of obtaining buy-in or trying to increase the capacity of the courts or the prosecution or what have you?
Yeah, wow.
It's a big question.
It's a big question, and if I knew the answer, or if I was able to give you the answer within the confines of this colleague chat, then wouldn't life be a lot easier? Not only in Jamaica, but in countries around the globe, or so-called first world countries or developed nations that share similar problems. Um, I think it's a complex issue, Faisal, and I think approaching it from an advisory position, I think there are some sort of initial blocks that help to navigate that complex issue. And one of them is understanding the system. So for a legal advisor, it's understanding the law and understanding how the institutions work, and really having a strong grounding technically in what the situation is locally. But secondly, understanding the people, actually, because we talk about challenges, you know, those challenges are manifested in the lives of genuine, reasonable people. You know, the human element, I think, is what I'm struggling to say. And, you know, for example, in the current circumstances we're in, working with judges who have families, some of whom have actually lost friends to COVID-19, understanding the human resource issues as well as the technical issues that exist in some of these institutions, you know, disagreements between people in offices, that sort of thing. So I think it's not only the sort of technical understanding, but being able to connect that together with the human elements, and then actually sitting back and thinking quite strategically as to how you can really add value and assist in this. And sometimes the reality is, because it's a complex issue, what we envisage through conversations with interlocutors when we're planning programs, etc., isn't necessarily the way things will pan out. I mean, just look at the last year and a half situation, and how we've all had to adapt within what is already a complex situation. So it's the technical and it's the human, but also it's the context as well. And it's also being very strategic and adaptable. Huge challenges, huge challenges.
In terms of successes, if we are gonna, you know, go from challenges to successes, you know, what have you been the most proud of in terms of the achievements that the host government that you've been working with for over the last almost decade have done as a result of the work that you did with UNODC, or the work you've done with us at PADF? What kind of successes do you take the most pride in? And what were your sort of implementation, you know, what was your like implementation roadmap, I would say? Because a lot of colleagues at PADF wonder, how do we do this, right? How do we do X, Y, and Z? How do we do an advisory ship? How do we do a technical assistance ship on, you know, on, let's say, crime prevention, or, you know, how do we do X, Y, and Z? What is the secret sauce of the successes that you've been able to identify over the last few years?
Secret sauce, I love that. Can I use that one, please?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
I don't think there's one secret sauce. I think, as we touched on earlier, it all depends on the local context, and it, you know, context can be quite complex. But I think the first thing, Faisal, is when I started out in this kind of work, there were a lot of the belief around this type of assistance was sort of output equals success, or sort of completing something equals success. So I have done a training course, therefore it's going to have the desired impact and positive benefit on the ground. Or I have done a study visit, great, I've completed it, job done, and therefore we're going to have the impact. And I think I quite soon came around to realize that that really isn't the full picture at all, particularly if we're looking at achieving outcomes and actually having the impact that we want on the ground. So as far as the approach goes, really it's having activities, whether that be a training course, whether it be mentoring lawyers or study visits, but having that designed in a way whereby the focus is actually on what implementation is going to happen on the ground after the activity, rather than the training course will happen, therefore we've done what we need to do. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is having any sort of instruments or tools that are developed, and even training items, having that integrated within the frameworks of the institutions that I'm working with. So to sort of give you an example, with the PADF activity, I think in the first phase of the program, we had a study tour with some judges and administrative staff from courts. So the study tour was done, but there were a series of activities arranged for when we came back to Jamaica after the study tour. And in fact, before going on the study tour, the team had already committed to actually implementing some reforms off the back of the study tour. So the study tour was really just part of a series of activities rather than the activity itself. So as far as sort of successes goes, a lot of strategic discussion and collaboration on this side, and then the study tour to get exposure to case management processes and that sort of thing. And then that dovetailed directly into what was already a program of reform that had been agreed, but needed to be fine-tuned off the back of the experiences that we had. And those reforms are still in place now in one of the busiest courts on the island with regard to the scheduling of cases and case management protocols, etc. So they were enriched by the experience on the study tour. And of course, that's now integrated into the framework of this particular courthouse. And similarly, with the law school, I did some work there. Again, exposure towards teaching techniques, training techniques, and practices within the courts. And that work was then integrated into the course manual for students. So we actually designed a whole new module around what they call case analysis, which was something that was only touched upon previously, but is integral to students understanding the approach that is going to be required of them when they reach the courts, which are then bringing in case management reforms. So again, it was an approach where I had the activity, then integrated it, and it was implemented. It's part of the curriculum now. So it has to be done. It's not just a standalone course, as is sometimes the case. Yeah, it was implemented, it's integrated, and it links in with the stuff that's, you know, further downstream in the courts as far as case management goes. So it's really that kind of sort of strategically planning the implementation rather than just the activity, and then also making sure that anything is actually integrated within the frameworks and the fabric. So it's more sustainable ultimately.
Right.
And then we can have the impact isn't necessarily as potent within the first few years, but a lot of this is sort of planting seeds. Particularly when we're looking at sort of legislative reforms or subsidiary sort of regulations, etc. A lot of it is sort of planting seeds that then can have a knock-on effect. Now, just to give one last example, perhaps on the legislation side, a few years ago, I worked on a project at the request of the Chief Justice here in Jamaica to put in place some rules of courts, so rules that regulate the procedure for the transit of serious cases from the lower courts to the upper courts. And again, that was an activity. We did the rules of court. They were enacted. There was some training off the back of it. Great. But as far as success goes and impact goes, and we're talking about knock-on effects, so because of that project and the way that it was advanced in a very inclusive way, you know, a lot of light bulb moments were had by various stakeholders. So one activity to produce some regulations for certain types of cases then led, for example, to the DPPs, the prosecution office, setting up a whole separate unit to then look more intensively at serious casework because of a lot of the criteria within the rules and the requirements. So they felt that actually, let's give these cases a little bit more attention and let's organize ourselves in a way that means that we can commit the staff to look at these cases in line with what the overall parameters that the courts need. So it's a kind of very strategic approach that's required with this. It would be very easy just to do a training course for lawyers, but where's that going to get us unless it's part of a more strategic approach towards what we're trying to achieve?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that is definitely a tenet that we're trying to strive as as PADF, as one PADF, as not only within peace, justice, and security, but throughout every thematic area that we work in, and also within PADF's own operations. I think that's just something, just trying to be strategic and trying to be integrated with how we learn, how we implement, and all of that. I think that's how you build and how you lay the foundation for success down the road. And hopefully in Jamaica, we'll see that, definitely, sooner rather than later. But I think what's been going on is definitely something that will yield fruits. In terms of my last question, for you, where do you see our community of practice going in the next 2 to 3 years? What would you like to see? What would you like to see PADF pursue, along the tenets that you just described in terms of the guiding principles of how we implement or how we try to strengthen institutions? And in your ideal scenario, what would you like to see the community of practice transform into and pursue in terms of opportunities in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I think as a principle, the idea of having a community of practice is fantastic. I think the issue then is for us as a team to decide, how to make the best of it, which I suppose is where your question's coming from. Two things, really. I think probably the first thing is I've been struck by the level of experience and expertise and the diversity that we have within the PADF staff at HQ, but also in the field. And I think if we can harness that and share it in a way that can be for the benefit of everybody, then I think we're onto a winner there. And perhaps, what does that look like? How does that manifest? It's something that a few other organizations I know do, particularly in the legal field, is organizing a schedule or a timetable of masterclasses or forums on specific, often technical issues. So it may be, I don't know, managing organizational change. It may be the challenges of gender-based programming or gender-focused programming. And within the complement of staff that we've got some really highly qualified and experienced expertise. So it could be led by individuals that have that wealth of expertise, and then it can be shared within the community. But that's how I see it. I mean, it's educational as well as vocational as well, So, so yeah, setting up like a schedule or a timetable, masterclasses, specific topics. Not everybody would want to tune into every topic, but if there's a timetable there, people can pick and choose which one they want to dial into, and then also you get people's enthusiasm because they want to be there. That's a topic they want to learn more about. So I think that would be useful. And then the second thing is, to share that expertise with external partners as well. So it may be that a similar schedule is put together, but that it's open to some of our partners either in the States or within the broader region that have an interest. And you know, you know, there are people out there that probably don't really appreciate the level of expertise and experience we have. So firstly, there would be that appreciation, and secondly, I'm sure they would learn and gain from that conversation that they could dial into. So yeah, sort of internal masterclasses, but also the kind of external webinars with our partners, etc. Yeah, that's kind of where I see it going, but on specific topics and areas led by our team. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great insight.
Mm.
So with that, I think we're done. If you had any other closing remarks, Francis, the floor is yours.
No, I mean, nothing really. I think we've covered a lot of ground. Thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation, and you know, I look forward to the community of practice, you know, expanding, evolving as it will do over time, and I'm sure it will be of great benefit to everybody who becomes involved in it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Francis, for your time.
Well, thank you, everyone. Goodbye.